The baby's crying tore through the marble hallway like an alarm siren. "Please, Harper, please don't cry anymore, sweetheart," Lila whispered in desperation, bouncing her 11-month-old daughter on her hip. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she tried to soothe the little girl who was wailing at full force. "Mom has to work, baby, please." But Harper only cried louder, tiny fists clenched tight, her face scrunched and flushed red with anger. The other house staff in the corridor glanced at Lila with worry, then quickly looked away. "You need to control that child, Mrs. Morrison," the head housekeeper said, her eyes flicking toward the double doors at the far end of the hall. "If he hears that—" I know," Lila forced out, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd only been working in this mansion for several weeks scrubbing floors in one of the most dangerous households in New York, several weeks keeping her head down and her mouth shut, several weeks pretending she didn't know who Ronan Voss was. "The nanny called in sick that morning," Lila explained, her voice trembling. "I didn't have anyone to watch her. I thought I could keep her quiet." "You thought wrong," Mrs. Morrison cut in. "Do you have any idea what kind of man he is?" The double doors burst open. Everyone in the hallway went rigid. Ronan Voss stood in the doorway like a storm given human form, tall and commanding, wrapped in a perfectly tailored black suit. His jaw was clenched so hard Lila could see the muscle twitch. Cold, ruthless gray eyes swept over the staff standing there like statues. "Who," he said softly, "is making that noise?" His voice was quiet in a way that was terrifying. Lila's blood turned to ice. Harper kept screaming, completely unaware of the danger, her small body shaking with each sob. "I asked a question." Ronan took one step forward, just one step, but it felt like the temperature in the hallway dropped sharply. "My child, sir," Lila managed, her voice barely a whisper. "My daughter. I'm sorry, the nanny." "Bring her here." Lila's knees nearly buckled. "Sir, I don't repeat myself." Every survival instinct in Lila screamed for her to run, to clutch Harper and bolt from this mansion and never look back. But her feet moved anyway, carrying her and her screaming child toward the man known as the Wolf, the most feared figure in New York. The other staff scattered like roaches exposed to light. Lila stopped a yard from Ronan, her arms locked tight around Harper. Up close, she could see the scar cutting along his left cheekbone. She could see the complete absence of warmth in that unyielding gray gaze. "I'm sorry," she said again, hating how her voice shook. "I'll leave right now. Give her to me." Lila nearly collapsed. "Sir, I don't think—" "Give her to me." Lila's arms loosened in spite of every instinct screaming inside her, and Harper, her daughter, the baby who screamed when even her own grandmother tried to hold her, the baby who couldn't tolerate a pediatrician's touch without falling apart, practically launched herself into Ronan Voss's arms. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ronan stood there, the man who commanded an empire built on fear and blood, with an 11-month-old girl clinging to his neck. Harper's tiny fist fisted in his expensive suit. Her cheek rested against his shoulder. Her little body went completely limp in absolute trust. And Ronan, his expression cracked just for a second, only long enough for Lila to catch something that looked almost like shock flash across his face before the mask slammed back into place. "She's calm now," he observed, his voice strangely neutral. Lila couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was seeing. Her mind simply refused to accept it. Lila swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I don't understand. She's never—" "What's her name?" "Harper." Ronan adjusted his hold with surprising care, shifting the baby gently, supporting her more securely. Harper made a small, satisfied sound and closed her eyes. She was falling asleep in the arms of the most powerful Mafia boss in New York, in less than a minute. If you're as shocked as Lila right now, hit like right now so I know you're following along. Share this video with your family and friends so they can watch too. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next in the story. "Sir, you're meeting Mrs. Morrison's voice rose from somewhere near the far end of the hallway, trembling. "The partners are waiting." Ronan didn't turn around. His gray eyes remained lowered to Harper, the baby sleeping soundly in his arms as if she were in the safest place in the world. "Reschedule," he said, his voice steady, unshaken. "Sir, they flew in from out of town. I said, reschedule." Ronan's tone cut like a blade, but he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Those 4 words alone were enough to make Mrs. Morrison fall silent and hurry out of the corridor. Lila stood there, her heart still racing, not knowing what she was supposed to do. She had just watched the most powerful mafia boss in New York cancel an important meeting simply because her daughter was asleep in his arms. It made no sense at all. "Come with me," Ronan said, then turned and walked toward the double doors he'd come through. Lila hesitated. "Sir, I can take her." "You'll wake her." Ronan didn't slow down. "Come with me." That wasn't an invitation. Lila swallowed hard and followed. She didn't have a choice. Ronan's office was larger than the apartment Lila rented. No, 3 times larger. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over all of Manhattan, the late afternoon sun pouring in and making the distant skyscrapers glitter. The polished oak floor gleamed, and a mahogany desk sat in the center of the room like a small fortress. Oil paintings hung on the walls, and Lila didn't know what they were, but she was certain each one cost more than she'd earn in her entire lifetime. But what made her shiver was the right corner of the room, a bulletproof glass cabinet, and inside it at least a dozen handguns lined up neatly like a watch collection. Lila forced herself to look away. "Sit," Ronan ordered, tipping his chin toward the leather chair across from the desk. He still held Harper, moving so gently the baby didn't stir at all. Then he sat in his own chair, one hand still supporting Harper in the most comfortable position. The image was too unreal. A mafia boss in a black suit worth tens of thousands of dollars, seated behind a desk of power with an 11-month-old baby sleeping peacefully against his chest. "Explain to me," Ronan said, his voice still carrying that terrifying coldness. "Why you thought bringing an infant into my house was acceptable." Lila drew a deep breath, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "My nanny had an emergency this morning, sir. She called at dawn. I called everyone I know, and no one could watch Harper on such short notice. And I couldn't miss work." "Couldn't or didn't want to?" "Couldn't, sir." Lila lifted her head and looked straight into Ronan's ice-cold gray eyes. "I'm several months behind on rent. My landlord sent the final notice last week. If I don't pay within days, he'll throw us out. And if I miss work today, I'll be fired. That means no home and no job with an 11-month-old baby." She stopped, breathing heavy. "I know it was reckless. I know it was stupid. But between taking the risk and watching my daughter sleep on the street, I chose the risk." Ronan said nothing. He only watched her, gray eyes unblinking, as if he were reading every thought in her mind. The silence stretched so long, Lila felt like she was being crushed under it. "Several months of rent," Ronan finally said. "How much?" Lila blinked, not understanding why he was asking. $4,500, sir. $1,500 a month." Ronan tilted his head slightly as if the number were so small he had to work to picture it. And maybe for him it was. This office, the suit he wore, the guns in that glass cabinet, each of them was worth 100 times the money Lila was desperately trying to find. "How long have you worked here?" Ronan asked. "Several weeks, sir." "And before that?" "I was a cleaner for a cleaning company. Before that," Lila hesitated. "Before that, I was a student." "Where?" She didn't want to answer. She didn't want to say that name. Didn't want to remember the life she'd had before everything collapsed. But Ronan's eyes didn't allow her to lie. "Yale," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was in law school at Yale." For the first time, something shifted in Ronan's expression. Not much, just the faintest lift of an eyebrow, but enough for Lila to see. He was surprised. "Yale," he repeated. "Law?" "Yes, sir, full scholarship. I was one of the selected that year." "And then what?" The question was simple, only 3 words. but it forced Lila to reopen a door she'd tried to bolt shut for nearly 2 years. She drew a deep breath, her fingernails digging into her palm until it nearly bled. "I met someone," Lila began, her voice fading smaller. "Jason Whitmore, the son of one of the wealthiest families in Connecticut. His father was a senior partner at a top Wall Street law firm. His mother sat on the board of 3 of the largest charities on the East Coast. He was handsome, charming, and he said all the right things a naive young woman wanted to hear." Lila paused, a bitter smile flickering across her mouth. "I thought it was love. He thought it was entertainment." Ronan didn't speak, only waited. His patience was more frightening than anger. "I got pregnant in the last semester of my 2nd year," Lila went on, her voice starting to shake. "When I told Jason, I thought he'd be happy. We'd been dating for several months. He said he loved me. He said he wanted a future with me." She stopped, swallowing the thick lump in her throat. "But when I showed him the test, his face changed like I just handed him a death sentence." Lila relived that instant, Jason's eyes turning from warm to ice cold in less than a second. "He told me I had to get rid of it. He said his family would never accept a child with a girl who wasn't suitable. He offered me money to solve the problem and disappear from his life." Lila's voice hardened. "He called my daughter a problem to be solved." Ronan didn't speak, but Lila noticed his jaw tighten just a little. "I refused," she said, lifting her head. "I told him I was keeping the baby with him or without him, and he laughed like I'd said the funniest thing in the world. Then he said, 'Good luck. Don't contact me again. My family will deny everything. You don't have any proof, and even if you do, you don't have the money to fight our lawyers.'" Lila remembered the feeling of Jason's apartment door slamming in her face. She remembered standing alone in the hallway, one hand still resting on her stomach, where a tiny life was growing, unaware that its father had just rejected its very existence. "2 weeks later, my scholarship was revoked," Lila said, her voice dropping lower. "The official reason was a violation of student ethics. But I know the truth. The Whitmore family has someone on the school's board. They wanted to make sure I disappeared." She let out a laugh, dry and empty of any joy. "And I disappeared from Yale, from my dream of becoming a lawyer, from everything I'd worked so hard to earn. I moved to New York because it was the only place I could be anonymous. Do any job just to survive? And now I'm here scrubbing your floors." Ronan rested one elbow on the desk, his chin on his hand, studying Lila with an expression she couldn't read. "What's his full name?" Lila froze. "Sir." "Full name, address, where his father works?" Ronan's voice remained calm, but something dangerous glinted in his storm-colored eyes. Lila understood at once what he intended to do, and it made her blood turn to ice. "No," she said, steadier than she expected. Ronan tilted his head, one eyebrow lifting. "No?" No, sir." Lila drew a deep breath. "Harper doesn't need a dead father. She needs a mother who isn't a murderer and isn't an accomplice to murder." She looked straight into Ronan's eyes without blinking. "I know you could find him easily if you wanted to, but I won't be the one to hand you that information. Not because I forgive him, but because I don't want my daughter growing up knowing her mother indirectly killed her father." A moment passed, then another, and then Ronan did something Lila never expected. He smiled. Not a warm smile, not a friendly one, just the faint upward pull of one corner of his mouth, and in his cold, sharp eyes, something flashed that looked like respect. "You've got a backbone," Ronan said slowly. "Interesting, very interesting." Lila didn't know how to respond to that remark. She sat very still, her hands laced tightly together on her lap, waiting for the sentence. Surely he was going to fire her. Surely he was going to throw her out of this estate, and she'd have to find a new job, a new place to live, a new life from nothing. She was used to that. She could start over. She'd done it once. She could do it again. But Ronan didn't say she was fired. Instead, he pressed a button on his desk. "Connor, come in." Less than a minute later, the office door opened. A man stepped inside, tall and lean, with eyes sharp as a knife and the gait of someone who could kill in silence. Lila recognized him as the one who had stood behind Ronan when he came into the hallway earlier. Connor Hayes, the wolf's right hand. Right behind Connor, Mrs. Morrison appeared as well, her face still pale with fear. Connor glanced at Lila, then at Harper sleeping in Ronan's arms, and his brows drew together in a rare flash of confusion. "Boss?" "Lila Harper," Ronan said, his voice even as if he were reading a financial report. "Young woman, former law student, has been working as a cleaner in this estate for several weeks." He paused, looking down at Harper again. The baby was still sleeping deeply, one tiny hand gripping the lapel of his expensive suit. "As of now, she's no longer part of the cleaning staff." Lila's heart sank. Here it was. The sentence had been handed down. "She's my personal assistant." The room fell into absolute silence. Lila was sure she'd misheard. She looked at Ronan, then at Connor, then at Mrs. Morrison, searching for any sign this was a joke, but no one laughed. Connor Hayes, the man Lila was certain had seen the worst things in the world, was staring with his mouth open like a stranded fish. Mrs. Morrison looked ready to faint, bracing herself against the wall to stay upright. "Boss," Connor said, his voice taut. "She possesses the intellect of a Yale attorney." Ronan cut in. "Top of her class before life dealt her a bad hand. She's observant, and more importantly, she has a spine. She's smart, observant, and she's got a backbone." He looked straight into Lila's eyes. "More importantly, she isn't afraid to tell me the truth. Do you know how many people in this organization dare to do that, Connor?" Connor went silent. The answer was obvious, no one. Lila finally found her voice again. "Sir, I can't." "You can and you will." Ronan didn't let her finish. "Your salary will be high." Lila caught in her breath. The number was enough to change everything. It could wipe out her debt, rent a decent apartment, give Harper a stable life. It could change everything. "The apartment above the garage is currently empty," Ronan continued. "You and Harper will move in tomorrow. Child care will be arranged on site. I have someone, a former agent, who specializes in child security. She'll make sure your daughter is safe while you work." Lila shook her head, trying to process what was happening. "Sir, I don't understand. Why? Why are you doing all of this? You don't know anything about me. You don't owe me anything. I'm just a cleaner who brought her baby to work and nearly ruined your important meeting." Ronan didn't answer right away. He looked down at Harper, still sleeping peacefully. Her tiny fist clenched around his lapel as if she were afraid he might disappear. The expression on his face changed only for a moment so fast Lila almost missed it. It wasn't coldness. It wasn't calculation. It was something else. Something like pain, like nostalgia, like loss. "Consider it repayment," Ronan finally said, his voice dropping. "Repayment for what?" Lila asked. Ronan lifted his head, his gray eyes meeting her blue ones. And in that moment, Lila saw something she was certain very few people had ever been allowed to see. A crack in the armor, a brief flare of the human being inside the monster's shell. "For what your daughter reminded me," Ronan said slowly, each word measured and weighed, "that not everyone who looks at me sees a monster." The room sank into silence. Connor stood frozen, eyes wide. Mrs. Morrison had to lean fully against the wall, and Lila simply sat there, staring at the man holding her daughter, the man all of New York feared, the man they called the Wolf. And she realized that maybe, just maybe, Harper had seen something no one else had. Lila swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Ronan replied. "Just accept." He stood carefully, transferring Harper from his arms into Lila's. The baby stirred, her lips moving softly, but she didn't wake. "Connor will arrange everything. You start tomorrow at morning." Ronan walked toward the window, turning his back to the room. "And Lila?" Lila lifted her head. "Don't make me regret this decision." That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She lay on a king-sized bed with fine sheets in the apartment Connor had called above the garage. though in truth it was bigger than anywhere she'd ever lived in her life. The ceiling rose high overhead, the oak floors shone like a mirror. The kitchen gleamed with pristine counters, and an enormous wall of glass looked straight out over the river. The lights of the city glittered in the distance like a million stars fallen onto the earth, and Lila lay there, eyes wide open against the dark, wondering if she was dreaming. Only hours earlier, she'd been on her knees scrubbing a bathroom floor. Only hours earlier, she'd been panicking over where she was supposed to find money to pay what she owed. And now she was lying in an apartment that was probably worth a fortune with a new job that paid well, and a mafia boss who had just promised her daughter a babysitter who was a former agent. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Lila turned on her side and looked toward the crib beside the bed. It was brand new, delivered only a few hours before they moved in. Connor had said it came from an upscale store, the kind wealthy families bought for their children. Lila hadn't dared to ask the price, but she knew it cost more than her old yearly salary put together. Harper was asleep inside it, tiny hands resting on her chest, her breathing steady and peaceful. She looked like an angel who had somehow made a monster change their lives completely in less than a day. Lila still didn't understand what had happened. Why had Harper lunged into Ronan's arms like that? Why had her daughter, the child who wouldn't let anyone hold her but her mother, trusted a stranger so completely? And why had Ronan, cold and ruthless as he was, reacted the way he did? Lila replayed the look in his eyes when he'd stared down at Harper. She remembered the split second when his expression cracked. She remembered what he'd said, that not everyone who looked at him saw a monster. There was something hidden behind that sentence, a pain, a memory, a wound that hadn't healed. Lila's phone vibrated, yanking her out of her thoughts. She reached for the new phone, another thing Connor had handed her that afternoon, along with a tablet and a thick stack of documents about her new job, a message from an unknown number. Lila opened it, her heart beating faster without knowing why. The baby, is she sleeping well? Lila stared at the screen. The most powerful mafia boss in New York, the man the entire city feared, was texting her about her daughter's sleep close to midnight. She didn't know what she was supposed to feel. Fear, gratitude, confusion, maybe all three. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed her reply. Yes, sir, she's been asleep for hours. She hit send, then waited. 3 dots appeared on the screen, disappeared, appeared again. Then the message came through. Good. Just one word, one single word, nothing more. Lila stared at the screen until it went dark and she realized there was a strange feeling in her chest. Not fear, not anxiety, but something warm, hazy, hard to name. She shook her head, trying to push it away. Don't be stupid, Lila. He's Mafia. He's a killer. He's dangerous. But when she finally closed her eyes, the last image in her mind wasn't the luxurious apartment, and it wasn't the expensive crib. It was the way Ronan Voss had looked down at her daughter with an expression she knew she would never forget. Morning came too fast. Lila woke when the first sunlight cut through the glass wall and shone straight across her face. She blinked a few times, and it took her a moment to remember where she was. The luxurious apartment, the river, the new job, the mafia boss. None of it had been a dream. She rushed through a shower, then pulled on the only professional dress she owned, something she'd bought at a thrift store back when she was in school for interviews. It was old, the hem worn thin, but it was the most professional thing in her closet. She smoothed her hair into place, dabbed on a little lipstick, and tried to look like someone who belonged here. She failed miserably. Exactly at morning, a knock sounded at the door. Lila opened it to find Connor Hayes standing there, his face still as cold as stone, though his eyes seemed a shade less sharp than they'd been the day before. You ready? He asked. Lila nodded, Harper in her arms. Connor led her down a long corridor, explaining the job as they walked. He'd given her the tablet and the new phone the day before, but now he walked her through how to use them in more detail. Ronan's schedule was synced to her tablet. Every work-related call, every work-related message would run through that phone. She would manage his appointments, screen his contacts, sit in on meetings, and take notes on everything. "You'll know things most people in this organization aren't allowed to know," Connor said, his voice grave. "That means you'll be a target if anyone wants to hurt the boss. You understand that?" Lila swallowed hard. "I understand." Connor studied her for a moment as if deciding whether she truly did. Then he nodded. "Good. Now go rest. Tomorrow will be busier." Lila stood, feeling relieved and full of questions all at once. She walked to the door, but before she could open it, Ronan's voice sounded behind her. "Lila?" She turned. Ronan stood by the window, the late afternoon sun casting him into a dark silhouette. "Kuso is dangerous," he said, his voice lowering. "You saw that correctly, but you also need to know that as of now, you're on his radar." Lila's heart tightened. "I understand." "I don't think you fully understand," Ronan answered. "But you will. Connor will explain more." She nodded and stepped out. Connor was waiting right outside the door, his face more serious than ever. He didn't speak, only motioned for her to follow. They walked down the corridor in silence until they reached a blind corner where no one could overhear. Connor stopped and faced Lila, his eyes sharp and cold. "Kuso noticed you," he said bluntly without any detours. "I don't know why. Maybe because you're pretty. Maybe because you're new. Maybe because he wants to provoke the boss. But the reason doesn't matter. What matters is you're on his radar now, and that's not a good place to be." Lila swallowed hard. "What should I do?" "Never go anywhere alone," Connor said, his voice like he was reading out a list of survival rules. "Don't leave the estate without an escort. Don't take calls from unknown numbers. Don't open the door for anyone you don't recognize. And if you see anything unusual, anything at all, you tell me immediately." He paused, locking eyes with her. "Understand?" Lila nodded, a cold feeling sliding down her spine. "I understand." Connor studied her for a moment, as if deciding whether she truly did. Then he nodded. "Good. Now go back to your daughter and remember what I said." Lila walked on, her heart pounding hard in her chest. She thought of Harper, of the safe apartment. She thought of Ronan and the way he'd looked at her when he spoke about Kuso. And she thought of Connor's warning. This world is dangerous, especially for people who stand too close to the wolf. But now Lila had no choice except to stand closer still. The weeks that followed passed like a strange dream Lila wasn't sure she wanted to wake from or not. She learned about Ronan Voss's world, a world built on blood and fear, yet run with the precision of a flawless machine. She sat through meetings with bosses and chief executives, took notes on everything, watched everyone, and reported back to Ronan what she'd seen. She learned how to read body language, how to spot when someone was lying, how to understand what wasn't being said. She learned how to move through the dark without letting the dark swallow her whole. And she learned about Ronan, not the Mafia boss, but the man behind the mask. Every evening, not a single day missed, Ronan came to her apartment to see Harper. He never gave notice. He simply appeared, knocked softly, and when Lila opened the door, he stepped inside as if that was where he belonged. Harper always recognized him instantly. She'd smile, lift her tiny arms toward him, and Ronan, the man all of New York feared, would gently pick her up as if he were holding a priceless piece of glass. Lila often stood there watching them, her heart tightening in a way she didn't want to admit. Those hands, the hands she knew had done terrible things, were now cradling her daughter with a tenderness she'd never seen in any man. Ronan would talk to Harper in a low, warm voice, asking her about her day, even though she could only answer with meaningless, babbling sounds. He'd rock her, sing lullabies, and sometimes, just sometimes, Lila would catch him closing his eyes as he held Harper as if he were trying to memorize the moment forever. And Lila's heart began to stir. She tried to deny it, tried to remind herself who he was, what he did, how dangerous he was. But each night as she watched Ronan hold Harper, as she saw the crack in his armor, as she heard his voice soften when he spoke to the baby, it became harder and harder to control her own heart. This isn't love, she told herself. This is only gratitude. This is only a mother's reaction to seeing someone love her child. But deep down, she knew it was a lie. To Ronan's office, and only occasionally to Ronan's office, and only occasionally catch the shadow of someone nearby. Now, there were always at least 2 men with her, silent as ghosts, but constantly present. Connor showed up more often, especially whenever she left the apartment. He didn't talk much, just nodded a greeting, and walked beside her like a living shield. Lila didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She knew the answer. Kuso. One night, about several weeks after the meeting with Kuso, Lila woke with an uneasiness she couldn't explain. She got up, went to the window, and looked down at the road below. Her heart skipped. A black SUV was parked just outside the estate gate. Lights off, engine silent. But Lila could see shapes inside, only blurred outlines in the dark. They were looking up, looking toward her apartment. Lila stepped back from the glass, her heart racing. She reached for her phone, about to call Connor. But when she looked again, the SUV was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Lila stood in the darkness, her hand still clenched around the phone, and she knew Connor's warning hadn't been an exaggeration. Someone was watching her. Someone was waiting, and the darkness around her was growing thicker by the day. One evening, about several weeks after the night Lila saw the black SUV, everything changed. Ronan arrived as usual, knocked softly, and stepped inside with a rare weariness showing on his face. Lila noticed it at once. The lines around his eyes were deeper than they normally were. His shoulders slightly slumped as if he were carrying an invisible weight. But when Harper saw him, when she squealed in that bright, familiar sound of hers, Lila watched that weight dissolve. Ronan sat down on the floor like he did every night and opened his arms toward Harper. The baby was clinging to the edge of the sofa, tiny legs trembling as she tried to keep her balance. And then something miraculous happened. Harper let go of the sofa. She stood on her own, wobbling for a second, and then she stepped forward. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, the first steps of her life, unsteady and stuttering. But every single one of them aimed straight for Ronan. Lila lifted a hand to her mouth, tears spilling out before she could stop them. "She's walking," she whispered, her voice thick. "Ronan, she's walking." Ronan didn't answer. He only stared at Harper with wide eyes, and Lila would have sworn she saw something shining there. Harper took a few more steps and wobbled again, and Ronan reached out and caught her before she fell. He lifted Harper up, pressed her tight against his chest, and her laughter rang through the room like wind chimes. "Good girl," Ronan said, his voice low and trembling slightly. "Look at you. You're so much stronger now." He turned to Lila, and in that moment there was no mask, no wall, just a man holding a child with all the tenderness he had left to give. Lila wanted to say something, wanted to thank him, wanted to tell him how much these moments meant to her, but she couldn't find the right words. They sat in silence for a while, Ronan rocking Harper in his arms, Lila on the sofa watching them. And then she remembered the black SUV, the sleepless nights, the feeling of being watched. She knew she should stay quiet, should leave things alone, but she couldn't. "Ronan," Lila said, her voice small but steady. "The black SUV outside the gate a few nights ago. Who was that?" Ronan didn't answer right away. He kept looking at Harper, but Lila saw his jaw tighten just a little. The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't respond at all. Then he finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. "Kuso's people, he's probing." Lila's heart clenched. She'd suspected it, but hearing Ronan confirm it still made her shiver. "Probing what?" "Probing my weakness." Ronan lifted his head, gray eyes meeting her blue ones. "He thinks you're my weakness." Lila blinked, not sure she'd heard him correctly. "Me? Why? I'm only your assistant." "You think Kuso believes that?" Ronan shot back, and there was something bitter in his voice. "He saw the way I looked at you in that meeting. He saw how I reacted when he mentioned you. He's a predator, and the best predators know how to find an opponent's weakness." A thick silence settled over the room. Lila didn't know what to say. She wanted to ask why. why he'd let it show, why he cared enough for it to become a weakness, but she didn't dare. Ronan looked down at Harper and something shifted across his face. The mask slipped, and Lila saw something raw, something old and deep. "I used to have a sister," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Anya. She was small like Harper. She laughed, too. She liked to be held." Lila stopped breathing. This was the first time Ronan had shared anything about his past with her. She didn't dare move, afraid any reaction would make him close up again. "Anya," Lila repeated softly. "What happened to her?" Ronan didn't answer right away. He stared at Harper, and Lila saw pain in his eyes so deep she felt like she could drown in it. "She died," he finally said, "and it was my fault." The room sank into silence after Ronan's words. Lila wanted to say something, wanted to comfort him, but she knew anything she offered right then would sound hollow, so she waited. And Ronan went on, his voice distant, as if he were speaking to himself more than to her. "That year, I was young," he began, his eyes still lowered to Harper, who was starting to drift off in his arms. "Anya was small. She was the light of our whole family. In a world as dark as ours, she was the only thing that was still pure." Ronan paused, his jaw tightening. "My father was the head of the organization before me. He built this empire from nothing, and he had a lot of enemies. I knew that. I grew up with it. But I thought my family was protected. I thought no one would dare touch us." He gave a short laugh, bitter and empty of any joy. "I was wrong." Lila sat perfectly still, not daring to breathe too loudly, afraid any movement might break this moment. Ronan was opening up to her, letting her see the deepest part of him, and she knew it was rare, something perhaps no one had ever been allowed to witness. "That night," Ronan continued, his voice dropping lower, "I was supposed to be home. My father told me to stay home, to watch Anya while he went to a meeting. But I was young. I was stupid. I thought I was invincible. I snuck out to meet my friends." He stopped, and Lila saw his arm tighten around Harper, as if he was afraid that if he loosened his hold, the baby would vanish. "When I came home, everything was burning. The door was blown open. The guards were everywhere. And Anya—" His voice broke. "Anya was in her bedroom. She was holding the teddy bear I gave her for her birthday. She looked like she was sleeping, except she wasn't breathing anymore." Tears slid down Lila's cheeks before she realized they were there. She looked at Ronan, at the man the world called a monster, and she saw a young boy still carrying a wound many years hadn't healed. "I promised her," Ronan said, his voice reduced to a whisper. "Before I snuck out that night, Anya grabbed my hand. She told me she was scared. She said she'd heard strange noises, and I told her there was nothing to be afraid of. I told her I would always protect her. I told her I promised." He lifted his head, gray eyes meeting Lila's tear-filled blue ones. "I promised, and I broke it." Lila couldn't hold back anymore. She reached out and laid her hand over Ronan's. The hand clenched tight around Harper. His skin was cold, but when she touched him, he didn't pull away. "That wasn't your fault," she said, her voice trembling but certain. "You were just a child. You couldn't have known." "I should have been there," Ronan answered, his tone hardening. "I should have protected her. That was my job." "No, Ronan. That wasn't the job of a young child. That was the job of the adults, the people who should have protected both you and your sister." Lila tightened her grip on his hand. "You didn't kill Anya. The people who attacked that night are the killers. You were only a boy who lost his sister." Ronan looked at her, and in that moment every wall fell away. No mafia boss, no wolf, just a man who had carried pain for many years, and a woman trying to show him he didn't have to carry it alone. "I spent many years taking revenge," Ronan said. Calmer now, but still thick with feeling. "I found every person connected to that night. I made sure they paid, but no amount of blood can bring Anya back." He looked down at Harper, then back at Lila. "When your baby threw herself into my arms that first day, I saw Anya. I saw my sister in her eyes, in the way she trusted me without needing a reason. And I knew I couldn't let that happen again. He lifted his other hand and placed it over Lila's where she held him. I won't break a promise again. Not with Harper. Not with you. Their eyes held and the air in the room changed. No longer employer and assistant, no longer mafia and cleaner. Only two people life had battered, finding something in each other they never expected. Lila felt the warmth in Ronan's hand, felt the pulse under her fingertips. She wanted to say something, wanted to admit what was growing inside her chest, but she couldn't. Not yet. And when she looked into Ronan's eyes, she knew he couldn't either. They both felt it. They both knew it was there, but neither of them was ready to name it. So they simply sat there hand in hand in a room washed with moonlight, with a baby sleeping between them, and let the moment exist without a definition. Everything changed on a morning. Lila knew it the moment she stepped out of the apartment. The air in the estate felt unusually heavy, as if a storm were gathering on the horizon. The guards she normally only caught in passing were now posted on every corner of the corridor. No longer bothering to hide, they stood in pairs, eyes sweeping in every direction, hands already resting at their sides, where Lila knew guns were concealed beneath their suit jackets. She counted quickly in her head and realized the number of guards had doubled. Something was wrong. When she reached Ronan's office, the door was slightly ajar. Connor stood inside, his face more severe than Lila had ever seen it. He was speaking in a low voice to Ronan, their heads bent close, and Lila caught a few words before they noticed she was there. "Kuso moving today," Connor said, his voice tight as a wire. Ronan answered something Lila couldn't make out, and Connor shook his head. He's lost his mind. An attack on the main house? He's got to know that's suicide. Lila stood rooted outside the door, her heart pounding. Kuso attack today. The words spun through her mind like a cyclone. She thought of Harper, of the safe apartment. She thought of her daughter's first steps, of the evenings Ronan came to visit, of the new life she'd only just begun to build. And she felt fear, real fear, not for herself, but for everything she could lose. Ronan lifted his head and met her eyes. His expression shifted at once from grim to something Lila couldn't read. He motioned to Connor, and the man nodded and stepped out, giving Lila a rare, worried look as he passed. "Come in," Ronan said, his calm forced into place. Lila entered and shut the door behind her. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I see guards everywhere. Today's meetings have all been canceled. Connor looks like he just saw a ghost. What's happening?" Ronan studied her for a long moment, gray eyes unblinking. Lila could see him weighing it, deciding how much to tell her. "It's nothing you need to worry about," he said at last. "Just some business issues that need handling." Heat flared in Lila's chest. "Don't do that to me," she snapped, sharper than she'd meant to. "I heard the name Kuso. I heard the word attack, and today. Don't treat me like a child who needs to be protected from the truth." Ronan went silent, his jaw tightened, and Lila saw something flicker in his eyes. Anger. No, something else. Worry. "Kuso is moving," he said finally, his voice dropping. "Our sources say he may act today. We don't know what he plans to do, but we're preparing for every possibility." Lila swallowed hard. "Every possibility includes an attack on this estate." Ronan didn't answer, but his silence was the answer. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. She thought of Harper with the babysitter right now, unaware of the storm bearing down on them. "Harper," she whispered. "She'll be safe," Ronan said, his voice hardening into steel. "I've increased security around your apartment. The babysitter has been fully briefed, and if anything happens, the safe room will protect both of you." He stepped closer, gray eyes locked on hers. "I promised I'd protect you and Harper. I'll keep that promise." Lila wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe everything would be fine, but she also knew that in this world nothing was certain and the storm was coming whether anyone wanted it to or not. That afternoon arrived wrapped in a false, fragile quiet. Lila sat in Ronan's office reviewing a contract he'd asked her to check. Ronan stood by the window as he always did, his back to her, a phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking to someone, his voice low and tight with strain. Lila tried to focus on the words in front of her, but her mind kept drifting back to that morning's conversation, to Kuso, to the storm Ronan had said was coming. She couldn't stop glancing toward the window as if she were waiting for something terrible to happen. And then it did. The office door blew open. Connor burst in, his gun already drawn, his face white as paper. "Boss, Kuso's men have—" He didn't get to finish. The glass window behind Ronan exploded. Lila would never forget the sound, glass shattering like a million crystals breaking at once, wind screaming through the gaping hole, and then the gunfire. Glass rained down like deadly snow, razor-sharp fragments spraying across the room. Lila didn't have time to react. She just sat there frozen, watching the world around her come apart in the most literal way. But Ronan didn't freeze. In the instant the window blew, he moved. Lila didn't know how anyone could react that fast, but before she could even understand what was happening, he had lunged over the desk, slammed into her, and dragged her down to the floor. His body pressed over hers, shielding her completely. Lila felt his weight, the harsh rush of his breath against her hair, the wild pounding of his heart in his chest. Bullets tore through the office, punching holes in the walls, shredding furniture, sending splinters of wood and chunks of plaster flying. The noise was deafening, as if the whole world were being ripped open. Lila wanted to scream, but no sound came out of her throat. She just lay there trembling beneath Ronan and prayed. "Stay down," Ronan roared, even though Lila was already flat against the floor. He reached for the phone in his pocket, his eyes never leaving the shattered window. The bullets were still ripping through the room, the gunfire still cracking, but he was calm in a way that was terrifying. "Walsh," he said into the phone, his voice cold as steel. "Secure the baby right now." Lila heard a faint reply on the other end. Then Ronan ended the call and shoved the phone back into his pocket. He looked down at her, his piercing stare sharp as a blade. "Are you hurt?" Lila shook her head, not even sure her voice would work. She checked quickly, arms and legs still there. No blood, only small scratches from the glass. "Good." Ronan nodded. He looked toward Connor, who was crouched behind a cabinet, firing back through the broken window. Connor, perimeter. 3 vehicles, Kuso's men. They're trying to get inside. Connor nodded, pulled a second gun from somewhere, and ran for the door. Gunfire outside didn't stop, and Lila heard shouting. Engines, explosions. A real battle was happening just beyond the glass. Ronan turned back to her, and despite everything, he was steady in a way she couldn't comprehend. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice low and absolute. He grabbed her face, forcing her to look straight into his eyes. "You're going to crawl to that door. You're going to run back to the apartment. You're going to lock yourself and Harper in the safe room. The code is the date. Do you remember?" Lila nodded, her throat closing tight. "The date." "Say it again." Lila repeated it. "Good." Ronan released her, but his gaze didn't let go. "Now go." Lila didn't move. She couldn't. "What about you?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I'll handle it, Ronan. Go, Lila." His voice softened for a split second, just long enough to cut her open, then hardened again. "Go to Harper. Protect her. That's the only thing that matters right now." A loud blast sounded closer, and Ronan shoved her toward the door. "Go." Lila crawled. Her knees and palms dug into broken glass, blood starting to spill. But she didn't care. She only thought of Harper, only thought of getting to her daughter. She crawled through the doorway, got her feet under her in the hallway, and ran faster than she'd ever run in her life. Behind her, she heard Ronan's voice, cold and terrifying, cutting through the gunfire. "You just made the last mistake of your lives." Then the shots grew even more violent, and Lila kept running, not looking back, tears streaming down her face. She prayed for Ronan. She prayed for Harper. She prayed for all of them to survive the day. Lila ran like she'd never run in her life. The corridor stretched on forever, each footstep feeling like it dragged a whole century behind it. Blood dripped from her palms and her knees onto the marble floor, leaving a red trail in her wake. But she didn't care. She didn't feel pain. She didn't feel anything except pure fear clamping down on her chest. Harper. She thought only of Harper. Where was her daughter? Was she safe? The gunfire still echoed behind her. The explosions, the screams, the sound of glass breaking, the sound of war in the middle of New York. Lila rounded a corner, nearly slammed into the wall, and kept running. Her apartment was at the end of the hall, only a few more yards away. She could see the door cracked open, and her heart felt like it was going to burst out of her ribs. She threw herself inside and saw the babysitter. The former agent had Harper in one arm, a handgun in the other, moving fast toward the back room. Her face was calm in a way that was terrifying, as if this were only another drill. When she saw Lila, she gave a short nod. "Get inside now." Lila didn't need to be told twice. She ran after the babysitter into a small room she hadn't even known existed. The safe room. Thick steel walls, no windows, only a heavy door with a keypad beside it. The babysitter pushed Lila in first, then stepped in after her, Harper still in her arms. She entered the code and the door shut with a heavy thud, like a coffin lid sealing. The sounds outside suddenly felt farther away, as if they were underwater, but Lila could still hear them. The gunfire, the blasts, the shouting. Steel could stop bullets, but it couldn't stop fear. Harper started to cry. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel it. The tension in the air, the fear in her mother's eyes, the danger prowling just beyond the walls. Lila reached out and the babysitter gently transferred Harper into her arms. Lila pressed her daughter tight to her chest, rocking her, trying to hold back the sobs rising in her throat. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Mommy's here, it's okay. Mommy will protect you." But the words sounded empty. Even to her. How could she protect her child when she couldn't even protect herself? Harper kept crying, the sound echoing in the small steel room, and Lila could only hold her tighter, kiss her hair, and pray. The babysitter stood guard by the door, weapon ready. She didn't speak, only listened, her sharp eyes sweeping the room as if she were calculating every possible outcome. Lila was grateful for her presence, but it wasn't enough to loosen the fear squeezing the air out of her. Time crawled in a kind of torture. Every minute felt like an hour. Every shot outside felt like a blade driven into Lila's heart. She didn't know how long it had been. Several minutes. Longer. Time fell apart, leaving only endless waiting and fear that kept swelling larger. She thought of Ronan, the way he'd shoved her down, shielded her with his body, the gray eyes that had locked with hers the last time before she ran, the cold, lethal voice he'd used when he faced his enemies. He was out there in the storm of bullets, fighting, maybe hurt, maybe dying by inches. And Lila could do nothing except sit here, hold her daughter, and wait. "Please," she whispered, not even sure who she was praying to. God, the universe, fate. She didn't care. Please let him be okay. Please. Harper finally stopped crying, exhausted in her mother's arms. She fell asleep, unaware that the world outside was collapsing. Lila envied that innocence. She wished she could close her eyes and believe everything would be fine, but she couldn't. So she sat there in the cold steel room holding her sleeping daughter and prayed for the man she had finally admitted she loved. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Lila didn't know how long she'd been sitting in that cold steel room, Harper in her arms, listening as the gunfire thinned, then stopped completely. The silence was more frightening than the explosions. At least while there were shots, she knew the fight was still happening, that Ronan was still out there, still fighting. But silence could mean anything. Victory, defeat, death. Lila tightened her hold on Harper, her heart battering against her ribs. The babysitter still stood guard at the door, gun ready, her eyes fixed on the steel. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. Then footsteps sounded outside, heavy, slow, coming closer. Lila held her breath, hugging Harper so tightly the baby stirred in discomfort in her sleep. The babysitter raised her weapon, finger set near the trigger, ready to fire at whoever came through that door. The keypad beeped. Someone was entering the code. Lila's heart felt like it was going to leap out of her chest. Only a few people knew that code. Ronan, Connor, the babysitter. If it was the enemy, they couldn't know it. But what if they'd tortured someone for it? What if they had? The door opened. Lila nearly collapsed with relief. Ronan stood there in the doorway, alive. But he looked like he'd just walked out of hell. Blood covered him. Some of it his, most of it not. His expensive black suit was nothing but torn cloth now. A long cut ran along his left cheekbone, blood still seeping slowly. His hair was a mess, streaked with blood and dust, but his gray eyes were still bright, still sharp, still alive. "You're safe." It wasn't a question, it was a statement, a confirmation he needed to hear from his own mouth. The babysitter lowered her gun, gave Ronan a brief nod, and quietly stepped out, leaving them alone. Lila stood up, her legs shaking, Harper still in her arms. She wanted to speak, to ask if he was hurt, to know what had happened. But before she could form a word, Ronan stepped into the room, crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, and pulled both her and Harper into his arms. Lila felt the power in his hold, smelled gunpowder and blood, felt his heart hammering wildly beneath his chest, and she felt something she hadn't expected. He was shaking. Ronan Voss, the wolf, the most powerful Mafia boss in New York, was trembling as he held them. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair, his voice rough and broken. "I'm sorry. This is my world, my danger. I put you and Harper in harm's way. Stop." Lila pulled back just enough to look into his eyes without leaving his arms. "You protected us. You kept your promise." "But what if I hadn't made it in time? What if they got inside? What if—" But they didn't. Lila lifted a hand and touched his cheek beside the cut that was still bleeding. He flinched under her fingers, but he didn't move away. "You protected us, Ronan. You didn't break your promise." They stood there for a long time in that steel, safe room, his arms around her and Harper as if they were the most precious thing in the world. Harper shifted between them, waking to the sound of voices. And when she saw Ronan, she didn't cry. She only looked at him with those clear blue eyes, then reached up with a tiny hand and touched his face right at the cut. Ronan hissed softly with pain, but he didn't pull away. He only looked down at the baby with an expression Lila had never seen on anyone. "Kuso?" Lila asked, her voice small but steady. Ronan looked at her and his gray eyes darkened. "He's not a problem anymore." Lila didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. She only needed to know the threat had passed, that they were safe, that Ronan was alive and here, holding her and her daughter as if he would never let go. "You need to have that wound bandaged," she said, trying to keep her voice calm, even though her heart was still racing. "Later," Ronan answered. "Right now, I only need to know you and Harper are okay." And he kept holding them there in the cold steel room in the aftermath of a battle that had just ended, as if it was the only place in the world he wanted to be. Harper was still staring at Ronan with those clear blue eyes, her tiny hands still resting on his cheek, right beside the cut that was slowly seeping blood, her little face suddenly scrunched up, her brows pulling together in the exact way Lila had seen 100 times whenever the baby didn't like something. But this time was different. This time, Harper didn't cry. Instead, she opened her mouth and a word slipped out, crisp and certain, as if she'd practiced her whole life to say it. "Owie!" Lila sucked in a breath. Her heart seemed to stop for a beat, then start pounding wildly. She stared at her daughter, hardly daring to trust her ears. Harper kept looking at Ronan, her small face full of worry, and she said it again, as if she needed to make sure he'd heard. "Owie." Then she patted his cheek right over the wound so gently it was barely a touch. "Owie." Her first word. Her very first word wasn't mama, wasn't dada, wasn't anything Lila had tried to teach her for 11 months. Harper's first word was Owie, and she said it to Ronan Voss because she was worried about him, because she could see he hurt. Lila looked up at Ronan, and what she saw made her want to cry. The mask had completely fallen away. No mafia boss, no wolf, no coldness, no ruthlessness. Just a man staring at a child with wet eyes and trembling lips, as if someone had reached into the deepest part of his soul. Ronan pulled Harper close, holding her so tight Lila worried the baby couldn't breathe. But Harper didn't protest. She simply melted into his arms, her little hand still soothing his cheek, her mouth still repeating, "Owie, Owie." "It's okay, little one," Ronan whispered, his voice breaking like glass. "It's okay, I'm okay." But he was crying. Lila could see tears sliding down his face, mixing with the blood from the cut, painting faint red tracks on his skin. Ronan Voss, the man all of New York feared, was crying because an 11-month-old baby was worried about him. They stood like that for a long time, Ronan holding Harper, Lila beside them, no one speaking. Then Ronan lifted his head, his gray eyes wet as they met Lila's blue ones, and he said, his voice low and rough, heavy with everything he'd kept buried for years, "Stay." It wasn't an order, it was a plea. "Both of you, stay with me." Lila opened her mouth to speak, but Ronan continued, as if he knew that if he stopped, he'd never find the courage to go on. "Let me protect you. Let me take care of you. Let me—" He paused, swallowing hard. "Let me be something other than a monster." Lila felt tears spilling down her cheeks. She looked at the man in front of her covered in blood and dust. The man who had just killed to protect her and her daughter. The man who was begging her for the chance to be human. She reached out and took his hand, the hand still smeared with blood and gunpowder. She held on tight, feeling the warmth of his skin, the pulse beneath her fingers. "You already are," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "From the moment Harper ran into your arms that first day, she saw it, and now I see it too. Still the one who promised to protect his, still the one who promised to protect his little sister. You're still the one who saved my life and my daughter's today. You're still the one Harper loves." She looked up at him, tears sliding down her face but her mouth lifting into a smile. "So, yes, we'll stay. Not because you asked, but because we want to." Ronan looked at her as if she'd just handed him the entire world. He didn't speak, maybe because he couldn't find the words, maybe because no words were enough for what he was feeling. He only reached out, pulled her into his arms, and held both her and Harper in an embrace Lila never wanted to end. And between them, Harper suddenly piped up, her voice bright and cheerful, as if she had no idea how important this moment was. "All better." Both Ronan and Lila went still, then burst out laughing. The laughter echoed in the steel room, warm and full of hope, pushing back the darkness and fear. Harper clapped her hands, delighted by the grown-up's reaction, and said it again. "All better, all better." And somehow, miraculously, everything really did get better. Several months later, everything had changed. Warm, golden afternoon sunlight poured across the estate's gardens. The place Lila once only dared to look at from a distance when she was still part of the cleaning staff. Now she stood among beds of blooming roses, laughter carrying through the air, chasing a young girl toddling fast across the lush green lawn. "She's running!" Lila called out, laughing as she tried to keep up with her daughter's tiny, quick feet. Harper glanced back at her mother, grinning wide, then kept going as if this were the most exciting game in the world. Her pale blonde pigtails bounced with every step, her clear laughter ringing like bells in the warm afternoon. And then the little girl ran straight into a pair of legs that had been waiting for her. Ronan bent down, lifted Harper up, and spun her in a wide circle through the air. Harper's laughter burst out even louder, even happier, and Lila slowed to a stop, watching the scene in front of her with a heart so full it almost hurt. Ronan looked nothing like the man she'd met for the first time in the mansion hallway many months ago. He wore casual clothes, his hair slightly messy from the wind, and the smile on his mouth was something Lila never would have imagined she'd see when she first stepped into his world. The scar along his left cheekbone had faded, now only a faint line, but it hadn't disappeared completely. Like his past, it was still there, a part of him, but it no longer defined him. Lila walked up beside them, watching Ronan sway Harper with a tenderness few people would ever believe from a man like him. "You spoil her too much," she said, but her voice held love, not scolding. Ronan looked at her, gray eyes warm in a way only she and Harper ever got to see. "That's my job," he answered. One arm still holding Harper while his other hand reached out and pulled Lila a little closer. "And spoiling both of you is my job." He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, soft as a passing breeze, yet filled with every feeling he'd spent many years trying to find again. Lila closed her eyes and let herself sink into the moment, into the sensation of being loved, of being protected, of belonging. Between them, Harper squealed and clapped her hands again and again. More kisses, more kisses. Ronan and Lila both laughed. He placed another kiss on Lila's forehead, then turned and kissed Harper's cheek, making the little girl giggle in delight. "Is that enough, little princess?" he asked. Harper shook her head, still clapping. More. And Ronan, the Mafia boss who once made all of New York tremble, indulged the request of a young girl without hesitation. Lila watched them, the man she loved and the daughter she adored, and she thought about the road that had brought them here. Many months ago, she'd been a desperate single mother, scrubbing floors to survive, on the brink of being thrown out of a crumbling apartment with no future, no hope. And Ronan had been a monster in the world's eyes, a man who lived in darkness carrying a wound that many years hadn't healed. They shouldn't have met. They shouldn't have fallen in love. They shouldn't have ended up like this. But a baby had changed everything. Harper, the young girl who wouldn't let anyone hold her but her mother, had thrown herself into the arms of a Mafia boss as if that was where she belonged. She had seen what no one else had seen. She had seen the man behind the mask, and in doing so, she had saved not only Ronan, but Lila, too. Sometimes the most unexpected bonds are the ones that redeem us. Sometimes hope comes from the place we least expect. And sometimes love doesn't need a reason or an explanation. It simply exists, powerful and pure, the way a child trusts a stranger the very first time they meet. This story reminds us that everyone deserves to be seen without prejudice, that behind a cold exterior there may be a heart aching to be loved, and that a mother's resilience paired with a child's innocence can melt even the strongest walls. In real life, we often judge others by appearances, by what we've heard, and we forget that everyone has their own story. Everyone has wounds that need healing. Dear friends, this is where the story ends. How do you feel after listening to Lila's journey, Ronan's journey, and little Harper's journey? Did this story remind you of anything in your own real life? We'd truly love to hear what you feel from the deepest part of your heart. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, please hit the like button. Share this video with the people you love, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more moving stories updated every day. We sincerely thank you for taking the time to stay with us until the very last minute. We wish you and your family good health and a life filled with joy and peace every day. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.